Welcome to All This Math. This is Professor Parker, and if you have not already, please go ahead and tap that button, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and also turn on the notifications, hit the notification bell button so that when I release new content, you'll be notified. All right, so what are we going to get into today? If you take a look behind me, we have written on the board a short problem where we're writing the equation of a line, right? And this is one of these problems that I want you to know how to do, right? Because this is a problem that it's like one of them things where it's like if nobody taught you how to do it, then you wouldn't know how to do it, and it would seem really difficult. But once I show you how to do these problems, right, whenever you see them, you just have to be responsible for remembering the steps and remembering how to do them, right? So let's first read it. Let's read it and gain understanding of what we're being asked to do. So we have to write the equation of the line that is perpendicular. That's an important term. Let me underline that. Perpendicular to the line 2x plus 7y equals 5. And it contains negative 7 and 5 as one of its points. So what does this mean? Every line has an equation. The equation of a line is like its name. It's like the name of the line. Just like we have names. I got a name. I'm Professor Parker. You got a name, right? Every line that you draw on a graph on the XY coordinate plane, it has a name. So we're saying we want to know the name of the line that is perpendicular to. Now, what does that mean? Perpendicular from geometry means that the two lines form a right angle. All right, like a capital L. They form a right angle, right? So they form a right angle or a 90-degree angle. That's what that means. Now, there's a special relationship between the slopes of lines that are perpendicular to each other. Just like when lines are parallel, they have the same exact slope. And you'll see problems like that too, where you got to find the equation of a line that's parallel to another line, and then they give you a point that's on that line too. But when lines are perpendicular, we got to do something else. We got to do something different. Now, another thing I want to tell you, and this is what I call a pro tip. Whenever you see a problem like this and they start talking about perpendicular or parallel, automatically start thinking about the slope. Start thinking about what the slope is of the line that you're given. All right? So that's the first thing I want to know. I want to know, like, well, what's the slope of this line right here? 2x plus 7y equals 5. What's the slope of that? Now, looking right at it, I can't tell what the slope is. Now, somebody might get confused and be like, oh, yeah, I know usually the slope is the coefficient of the x term. So, boom, let me just do little m equals 2. I know the slope of that. And let me keep going. Hold up. Don't do that. You know why? Because the slope is the coefficient of x when it's in slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. That's not slope-intercept form. That's called standard form. When you got the x term and the y term together on the left side of the equal sign and the constant on the other side of the equal sign, that's called standard form. So when you got standard form, there's something else going on. So you can't just say, oh, the slope is always the coefficient of x, because it's not. If you say that, you'll be wrong. I mean, you can say whatever you want to, but you're going to be wrong, though, right? But we want to be correct. We want to be accurate. So what we do is we think to ourselves, well, if I have an equation in standard form, how do I find the slope? And you notice how I keep asking questions, because I want you to get into the habit of asking questions, because if you ask the right questions, then you'll get the right answers. All right. So the question we ask again is, how do I find the slope when the equation is in standard form? Now, you got a couple options. One option is some people like, they like the slope-intercept form so much, what they'll do is they'll solve for y in order to put this into slope-intercept form. You could do that. Subtract 2x, move it over to the other side, divide everything by 7. Boom. Then you'll know, then the coefficient of x will be the slope. But there's a shortcut to that. There's a formula you can memorize. M equals negative a over b. M equals negative a over b, where m is the slope, is equal to negative a over b. Now you're probably wondering, well, what's a and what's b? Where does that come from? Well, a is, when it's in standard form, when your equation is in standard form, a is the coefficient of x. B is the coefficient of y. So now I just replace. I replace the letters with numbers. So I got negative 2 over 7. Negative 2 over 7. So that's my slope. Straight like that. It's that easy. When we have an equation in standard form, use this formula to find the slope. M equals negative a over b. So that's negative 2 over 7. So now, next question is, what do I do with that? How do I find, now I need to find the slope of my new line, right? Because I'm trying to find the equation of a line that's perpendicular to this line. And that also contains this point. So knowing that it's perpendicular is going to tell me how I can figure out what the slope is going to be. Now, when lines are perpendicular, they have a special relationship. Their slopes have a special relationship. Their slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. Negative reciprocals of each other. So what that basically means is this. You find the slope of one line, you're going to do two things to it. The first thing you do is, and you don't got to do it in this order, not necessarily, but you got to do these two things. You got to change the sign and flip the fraction. Change the sign and flip the fraction. So this right here is negative. So you got, when you change the sign, it's going to become positive. This is 2/7. When you flip the fraction or take the reciprocal, it's going to become 7/2. That's your slope. That's the slope of the new line that you're looking for. So now you know the slope of the new line. All right? It's that simple. When lines are perpendicular, you got to memorize this. When lines are perpendicular, their slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. Negative just means the opposite sign. You know, that's when you have a deeper like math understanding and we understand like the definitions of terms. Negative is not always a bad thing. Negative just means it's the opposite of whatever's going on. That's why a double negative is a positive. Because if you're already negative and you take the negative of that, it gives you a positive, right? Negative really means opposite of whatever you already have. And then the reciprocal, the numerator and the denominator just switch places. So now I got 7/2. So now I got my slope. So now I need, in order to write an equation, and I want the equation to be in slope-intercept form. I don't want it in standard form. I want it in slope-intercept form. In order to do that, I need something else. I need another piece of information. I need something called the Y-intercept. Now, if you graph this, the Y-intercept is the number where the line is going to cross the Y-axis. So if I had a little, XY coordinate plane like this, this is my Y-axis. So the line is going to, where the line crosses the Y-axis, so this right here, this will be the Y-intercept right there. Lines have billions and billions and an infinite number, really, of X and Y values. The Y-intercept is the one single most important value, I would say. I call it the most important value, right? It's one of many, but it's the most important, right? So now I got to figure out, okay, how do I figure out what the Y-intercept is? That's another good question you need to ask yourself. What is the Y-intercept? If I don't know the Y-intercept, how do I figure out what the Y-intercept is? That's what you got to do. How do I figure that out? Here's one way to figure it out. We can take this information we have because we know one of the points, and that -7 is my X value. That 5 is my Y value, right? I could take that, and I can take this slope that I have because that's my M value, and I can plug them into Y equals MX plus B and solve for B because I know Y, I know M, I know X. My Y is 5. So what I could do is I could write in the place of Y, I could put a 5. In the place of M, I could put 7/2. Next to that, in the place of X, I could put -7. And then I put plus B. Now that's the setup. That's the setup for the equation so that I can solve for B. All right. First thing I need to do, multiply 7/2 by -7. 7/2 times -7. We got to know how to multiply fractions. We got to know how to do that. That's a non-negotiable. We got to know how to do that. It's going to be -49/2. 7/2 times -7 is -49/2. Over here we got 5, and we still got plus B. Now I'm trying to isolate B. That's how we solve for things. We isolate. So I got to get rid of this -49/2. The opposite of a -49/2 is a +49/2. So really all I'm doing is I'm going to add 49/2 over here to get rid of this. And I also got to add 49/2 over here. Right? And that's going to leave me with B. Now, I got to also know how to add and subtract fractions. I got to know how to do that too at this level. I got to know how to multiply fractions, even if I'm multiplying by an integer. And I got to know how to add fractions to integers. Now, basically, I got to know that 49/2 and 5, which is really 5/1, right? Because you can make any whole number into a fraction by just putting a 1 underneath of it. They have common denominators of 2. So I can change this 5 into, And I'm going to do the math over here, right? Do the math. So direct your attention over here. I'm going to do the math over here. 5 is going to turn into 10 over 2. Because 5 is the same thing as 10 divided by 2. And then I'm adding 49 halves. And I have to do that because we're dealing with common denominators. The only way you can add or subtract fractions is if you have a common denominator. You got to have a common denominator. So now I got 10 plus 49, which gives me 59. And I got 59 halves. You never add the denominators because the denominators are really a unit. Just like if you talk about, okay, he got $5 and you got $20, you add the 5 and the 20. You don't add the word dollars and the word dollars together. You just add the 5 and the 20. Same thing with fractions. This is 10 halves. This is how many halves you have. You got 10 of them. This is how many halves you have. You got 49 of them. So that's a way to remember that you never add the denominators, in case you forgot that. So now this means that 59 halves is equal to B. 59 halves is equal to B. So now that I know, this marker's trash. So now that I know what B is, because I need 2 pieces of information to write my equation in slope-intercept form. I need a slope and I need an intercept. That's why it's called the slope-intercept form. Everything in math makes sense. I promise you. I promise you. Everything in math makes sense. But you got to learn the rules. Once you learn the rules, you realize everything makes sense. Right? This is called the slope-intercept form because when you write it, you will include the slope, which is M, and the y-intercept, which is B. Now, let's write the answer. I don't write a value for y. I keep the letter y or the variable y. I replace M with 7 halves. I write an x. I keep the variable x. I do not replace x with a numerical value. And my b, we just solved for that, 59 halves, right? So it's plus 59 halves. And that is the equation of the line that is perpendicular to this line and contains -7 and 5. All right? And that's it. That's how you do that. So again, whenever you see this type of problem, don't get intimidated, don't get nervous. Just know, perpendicular means that the slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. So what you got to do is, you got to first identify the slope of the line that you're given. There are different ways you could do that, right? You can rewind the video and look back on how we did it, right? We basically just use this formula. M equals -a over B. You got to know what A is and know what B is, all right? Then you take that slope and then you do 2 things to it. You change the sign and you flip it. It don't matter which order you do it in. You could flip it first and then change the sign. If we did it the other way, we still would have got 7 halves. You know what I mean? Then you take that and then you do what you got to do. You go back to the slope-intercept form of an equation and you plug in everything you know so that you can solve for B. Solve for B. So you know X, you know Y. Replace the X with that number. Replace the Y with that number. Replace the M with that number. And then you solve for B. But you got to know how to use the steps of algebra and how to solve equations in order to do that. All right, so I hope you learned something new. If you did, go ahead and like the video. Also, share this video with some people. You know, send it out. You know, send it to somebody's phone. You know, anybody that's studying Algebra 1 or Pre-Algebra or Algebra 2 may need to know how to do this. Also, you'll see these types of problems on the SAT and the ACT. All right, so you want to know how to do this type of problem when you see it, okay? So you can make it a non-issue if you know how to do it. All right, so again, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And as always, do remember that there's all this math all around you. Peace.